Are you tired of spending too much of your hard-earned money at the supermarket? Are you dreaming of farm fresh eggs, homegrown veggies, and homemade everything? Well, welcome to Ditch the Store, where we break free from supermarket dependence and take back control of our food and household essentials. I'm CJ, and I'm here to show you that life is too short for store-bought eggs. So let's get started. G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ditch the Store. We've got some exciting news coming up. I can't tell you just yet because, well, I can, but oh no, I can't. Okay, so keep an eye out for our socials. You will see some things being advertised very shortly about where we're moving forward as far as courses and online resources for people to use in order to help them ditch the store and do and grow and make and raise things in their own home or in their own backyard or on their little farmlet or on their massive big farm, depending on where you are. Anyway, it's coming soon, so keep an eye out. I'm very excited about it. I'm just working like crazy behind the scenes. I feel like one of those ducks sitting on the water, when it's a bit rough and, above they look calm and everything's, functioning, and underneath the water they're paddling like fucking crazy. That's exactly how I feel right now. So keep an eye out. You will see stuff shortly. Anyway, we are still on sourdough months, 8 weeks. It's roughly 8 weeks. We're still on sourdough. And I just want to let you know that the other day, OJ, my son, who's 13, helped me make a loaf of sourdough. Normally the kids, they're only interested in the end product and eating the end product. He actually came to me. He's been doing some stuff in science regarding fermentation and things like that. And he came to me and said, I want to have a go. Like, show me what you do because I'm interested. So he helped me make a dough, and he helped feed the starter and put that aside for later. And then he came back and did the stretch and folds and everything like that. Anyway, it was very, very cold here over the next 24 hours and it didn't rise as well as it could have. And he's like, that's okay, because next time I'll get it better. I'll make it work right. Anyway, I was trying to explain to him about fermentation and temperatures and things like that. And that's what we're discussing today is fermentation and how and why it works and what it is, because it does seem a bit like a science project for most people. And I just want to clear a few things up because it's not that scientific. It's magic. I think it's magic. It's like, what did they used to say? I forget the phrase, but it's the hoodoo woo-woo stuff of how bread's made. But it's not that hard to understand. And certainly when I explained it to him, he got it and went, oh, so it wasn't my stretch and folds that made it not rise as much. It was the temperature. So yeah, proud mummy moment where I felt like, yay, I got through to him. Anyway, what is fermentation? So fermentation is actually what makes the dough turn into bread. That's the guts of it. But behind the scenes, what happens is flour and water mixing together has a chemical reaction. Now, anybody that's a bit of a science geek, and I have to put my hand up to that one, I am a little bit of a science geeky kind of person. I studied chemistry and physics in year 11. I don't know why, because I failed both badly, but I had great fun trying, but they're both very hard subjects back then. I don't know now. I don't think either of my children are going to go that far down the science route, but yeah, never knows. But what happens is you feed your dough, so you've got your active starter, and two things kick into gear. And one is the wild yeast. So you know that if you're a baker, we use baker's yeast sometimes from the supermarket. And the whole point of making sourdough is that you're not using baker's yeast. You can still make bread at home with baker's yeast. And when I've been in a pinch and hurry and had to turn out bread rolls, in an hour for lunch or something like that, I have done it. I've used baker's yeast, but I'd much rather plan ahead and do it with sourdough because it just tastes better. It feels better in my stomach too. I can't always eat the baker's yeast. And I don't know what it is about the baker's yeast that irritates some people. We'll discuss a little bit further down, but it definitely does impact me. If I have anything with baker's yeast in it, it does have a little bit of impact. So I'd rather not use it. So wild yeast starts eating the sugars that are in the flour. Now, before you say there's no sugars in flour, if you look at glycemic index on things, flour is actually pretty high in natural sugars. And I'm not talking sugar like sugar cane. I'm talking the sugars that are in all foods. So they're in fruits, they're in vegetables, any carbohydrate they're in. Your meats won't have sugars in them unless you add them in a rub on the outside. But meat won't have sugar in it. Fats don't have sugar in it unless you, well, they do. I shouldn't say that. Some fats have sugar in them. So cream has a level of sugar in it. If you look on the back, it's a base level of carbohydrates, but there is some sugars in there. Milk is high in carbohydrates, and that's why when people do carnivore diet, they tend to cut out milk and they'll use cream or butter if they want any kind of dairy added to anything. So carbohydrates equate to sugar. Flour obviously is high in carbohydrates, so it's high in sugar, and the wild yeast eats the sugar, which I think is a good thing. And I think that's part of, my sort of half sciencey mind, not being a super expert. I think that's why the bread is so much better for you, because it's not as high in sugar. I mean, anybody that's, and we've all done it. You're in a hurry. You go through the Macca's drive-through when you're traveling because you don't have anything else to eat and you haven't planned, or it's just more convenient to stop there, eat, wash your hands, go to the toilet and get on the road again. The bread rolls that they make at Macca's are super, super high in sugar. I actually can't tolerate them. I eat them. If we stop and I take a bite, it's like, oh my God, it's so sweet. Like I can taste the sugar in it. So the wild yeast eats the sugars and it gives off a carbon dioxide reaction, the gas, which is what causes dough to rise. And it also causes your starter to rise. So that carbon dioxide gas is what causes all the bubbles and makes it go up. It also, at the same time, you've got lactic acid bacteria. So lactic acid, if you ever worked out in the gym, the next day your legs are sore, your muscles are sore, and people say it's lactic acid. So lactic acid is a really common kind of reaction that happens. But in food, it's a friendly bacteria. And it's a bacteria that can be used in yogurt, sauerkraut, so, your fermented food kind of pyramid. Lactic acid will be present in those foods, and it starts producing lactic and acetic acid. I had to look down there because I could never remember which one it is, which gives the sourdough its unusual sour taste, is the lactic acid. But it also is what extends its shelf life. So where you have sourdough that would last a lot longer in comparison to, say, commercial bread, where there has to be things added to make it last longer and stay soft and everything. Sourdough won't stay as soft as a commercial bread. It'll only be as soft as a commercial bread before the air gets to it, essentially. But it will last a long time without going mouldy. Now, I've tested it. I chucked it in a bag and tested to see how long sourdough would take to go mouldy, and it was 7 days. I thought that was a pretty good run, considering, white bread. Well, the white bread that I grew up with used to go mouldy after about 3 or 4 days. The white bread of today does not go mouldy that quick. Certainly, we've had it sitting there for 5 or 6 days and not had mould signs on it. But then that begs the question, why is it not going mouldy? But the sourdough, I did have it sealed in a beeswax wrap bag, so that I think it didn't have as much oxygen exposure. I think if I'd left it out on the bench, it probably would have gone mouldy a bit quicker because it would have more bacteria around it. But it does extend its shelf life having that lactic acid in there. So those organisms are already in your starter, and when we feed the starter, it produces more of it. And when we mix it with flour and water and salt to go into bread, it also feeds it and makes it expand. Now, it sounds weird saying that that's great that we've got bacteria in our food, but we have healthy bacteria in our gut. Yogurt, we know, is super awesome for your stomach, and it contains so many bacteria. But people still get a bit of a thing about, oh, it's got bacteria in it. Anybody that hasn't tried fermented food out there, I would strongly encourage you to get on the bandwagon. We have tried in our house, obviously sourdough bread and yogurt, which we make. Certain cheeses would be considered fermented food because they are left to sit. We have tried kombucha, which is a drink, an alternative to soft drink. I try and tell the kids. They tend not to like my plain kombucha. I don't know why. They like the flavoured ones from the store because they've probably got shitloads of sugar in them. But kombucha is a very tangy, sour tasting drink that gets a lot of bubbles in it. So I always refer to it as the alternative to soft drink. And it is really good for you because it contains a lot of healthy bacteria. We've also, what's the other ones that sauerkraut, obviously, and pickled vegetables, anything like that where you're fermenting food and letting that healthy bacteria grow in it. And what was the last one I was going to say? Oh, our preserved lemons. Oh my God, if you haven't tried preserved lemons, it was actually a Michael Mosley who did the Fast 800 diet books. It was actually a recipe I got from one of his web pages, preserved lemons, where you squish all the lemons down into liquid and put salt all over them and preserve them just like you would sauerkraut or pickled vegetables or anything like that. These preserved lemons were so good. Sprinkled a few of them over a salad, mixed a few in with some veggies. It was this weird sensation of really salty, really sour kind of taste, but it was just enough to give a real spark to things. But it made my gut feel amazing. So if you haven't tried fermented food, go try fermented food. It's awesome. So what exactly happens with bread? Because we have discussed this, that there are some people who can't eat bread at all. They can't have flour products. So wheat, rye, and barley, I think I want to say, are the ones that have gluten in them. Now, if you're a celiac or you know a celiac, you know that they can't have gluten. And it's not about being insensitive or having a little bit of a reaction. A proper celiac, somebody who's diagnosed as celiac, actually lacks the enzymes, the digestive enzymes, to break down the gluten in their body, and they get a autoimmune reaction to eating gluten. So if you are celiac or you think you're celiac, I would encourage you to go and get tested. Lots of people don't trust the medicos these days after all the dramas that we've had over the last couple of years, but celiac is essentially you're allergic to gluten. And it's not something to be mucked around with. If you think you are, go and get tested, and then you'll know for certain whether it is a genuine allergy. If it's a genuine allergy, it can make you very, very ill, but it can cause permanent damage to your body if you keep eating gluten. So if you think you are, go get tested. And certainly my understanding is that in a lot of cases, people don't get diagnosed celiac until later in life. And that's probably because eventually their body just packs up and goes, no, I can't handle the gluten anymore. But it's got to do with the enzymes not being able to process the gluten in your body, and then that causes an allergic reaction or an autoimmune reaction, whichever way you want to look at it, and that causes you to be very sick, and you can have all kinds of stomach problems. It can actually permanently damage your bowels, so definitely not something to be mucked around with. But the good news is for those of us that aren't celiac like me, who just have always been a little bit sensitive to gluten, the fermentation process is a godsend for us. So, and I have to read this off the screen because I have a couple of names here that I will stuff up, I'm sure. Gluten, we know gluten is a protein found in wheat. It's also found in rye, and I think barley is the other one. Some people say it's in oats. It's not in oats. Generally, the reason that oats aren't suitable for celiacs are because they've been processed on the same kind of production lines that process wheat, rye, and barley, and therefore they've come in contact with gluten. And for a celiac, not just somebody who's sensitive, any amount of gluten will cause the autoimmune reaction. So generally, celiacs can't touch oats either, unless there are some oat brands out there. I think Red Mill, I want to say, they do have oats that are processed on a non-wheat, barley and rye line. So they guarantee that they are gluten-free. So the two proteins that we're really interested in are gluten and gliadin. Hope I said that right. And they are a really good gluten because they're the gluten that makes bread chewy and traps the air bubbles and gives it strength so that, it forms like a proper loaf and doesn't just fall apart like a pancake. So we need to have those in that bread. Like I said, if you don't have the enzymes, and the enzyme, I've got it here, it's protease is the name of the enzyme that helps our body process proteins. And some proteins it can break down completely, like meat proteins, obviously. They're very, very digestible by the human body, but it can't always break down gluten. Undigested gluten goes through into the small intestine, and while most people can handle that, if you are sensitive to gluten, you will probably get stomach reactions. If you are celiac, you will absolutely get an autoimmune or allergic reaction. So During that fermentation process, what happens to the gluten? And this is the important bit, because this is why some people with gluten sensitivity can have sourdough without too much problem. So the gluten development is when the dough rests and ferments, and the gluten proteins align and become like a stretchy elastic network, and it traps CO2, carbon dioxide, into the yeast, which then makes your dough rise and hold its shape better in the oven. So that's part of that gluten development, is that stretchiness. Now, that's why sourdough doesn't need to be kneaded in the same way that other breads, because the process of the sourdough bacteria, that's what makes the gluten do its thing. So you don't have to pound the crap out of it. Now, the natural enzymes and acids from the bacteria partially break down the gluten in that process. While it's making the dough, it's partially breaking down the gluten in order to make that knitting together work a bit better. So that's why people who are sensitive but not allergic can sometimes eat sourdough without a reaction. Now, not for everybody. Some people who are sensitive are highly sensitive and they can't anyway. But if you find that you can eat sourdough but you can't eat normal bread, that might be it. It might be that you are a bit like people who are lactose intolerant. It's not really lactose intolerance, it's pasteurized milk intolerance, but it's because the enzymes that help us digest milk have been taken out of it in the pasteurization process. So that means that some people, like OJ and myself, if we drink pasteurized milk in massive quantities, our bodies can't handle it. If we have it in small quantities, we're fine, because our body can tolerate a small amount and process that without causing us grief. Same for people with gluten intolerance. They eat sourdough bread, they go, oh, I ate sourdough bread, I didn't get a reaction. They eat normal bread, they get a massive reaction. It's because their body can handle small amounts of unbroken down gluten. They can't handle the full amount of unbroken down gluten. So if you are sensitive to gluten and you haven't tried sourdough and you're listening to this because you're a little bit, I want to say sourdough curious, that kind of sounds a bit, odd, but sourdough curious, definitely get yourself proper loaf of sourdough, not one from the supermarket, one from a baker, and ask them and say, is this proper sourdough? Is it just bread, water, and salt? Is that all that's in it? And they'll tell you. They usually, if they make sourdough bread, they're pretty proud of it. So they'll tell you if there's anything added to it. Now, the other thing that happens during that fermentation process is that you get a really good texture and a really good flavour. So the acids don't only strengthen the dough, but they actually slow down the activities of the enzymes that would normally break it down too fast. And the result of that is you end up with not gummy bread, but really air-filled, pocketed bread. So you get that lighter, fluffier bread. And you get that beautiful sourdough flavour, which is the main reason why most people, I think, eat sourdough bread, is because they like the flavour of it. It's just got a tang to it that other bread is just quite bland. Like, we had bread the other week. I hadn't made any bread and the kids needed bread, and I bought a loaf of bread. And the kids actually commented that it tastes like eating cardboard, like it doesn't have any kind of texture or taste to it. So if you are going for that nice long fermentation, remember, you're not just doing yourself a favour as far as the flavour, you're actually doing yourself a favour as far as the digestion aspect of it and the texture. So realistically, aim for more than 24 hours with a sourdough and you'll get a good bread. So next one. And that's why people get frustrated, I think, with sourdough, because it takes longer to get a good loaf of bread, but it's worth the wait. Especially if you're like me and you do have a bit of a reaction to sourdough, to commercial breads, then having sourdough, it really is worth waiting for it so that you can have a piece of bread and go, really enjoy that. That's nice. We actually had sourdough last night that I'd made yesterday I do a Highlands fish stew. I lived in Papua New Guinea for 4 years, and they used to put out these recipe cards from different food groups, different food companies. So this was for Sunrice. If anybody remembers, Sunrice was the rice that everybody used to eat back in the day. And they put out a card, and it's tuna, canned tuna with rice soup. It sounds disgusting. It tastes fucking amazing. And with some fresh bread, it was the bomb. The kids sat there and we didn't hear a word out of them. Me and the handy helper sit there going, because we hadn't had it for ages. And I said, he's right. Do you like it as much as when I used to make it? And they were like, oh my God, we need to have this more often, Mum. This was so good, especially with fresh bread. So timing and timing is everything. Like you can't rush sourdough. And like I say, I think that's what puts most people off. But I think if you don't have to babysit it, you don't have to hover over it and be constantly, doing things to it. You can put it down, walk away and do something else. And that's where you just need to get into a really good pattern of that fermentation timings and schedule. So the main thing to think about is this, and I've got lists of times down here. So anything under 4 hours, even if you've got the good temperature in your house and it's bringing it up, we'll discuss temperature in a sec. Even if you've got the good temperature in your house and it's making it rise and all the rest of it, anything under 4 hours, you're not going to get the same taste or texture out of it because it just hasn't had time to break down all that gluten. So under 4 hours, it'll make a loaf of bread, no problems. It won't be your best loaf of sourdough. A medium ferment, that's a short ferment. A medium ferment is between 6 and 8 hours. Now, this is when you're in a hurry, it's a hot day, you know you're going to get a good rise out of it, but you've got to get the bread done that day. So sometimes if you're looking at recipes online, you can look up same day sourdough and you'll find it. And it'll be something that is only a 6 to 8 hour rise. And therefore you can, from that, bake a loaf of bread that day. Again, not going to be your best loaf, but you will get a better crumb on the bread. So the air pockets will rise better within the bread. So it'll be lighter, fluffier, that kind of thing. And it will still have a little bit of a sour tang to it, which is the flavour that you're after. So that's good. So you can do it same day. You just got to look. And you have to have a good temperature, which, like I say, we'll discuss in a minute. But a long ferment, which is what I normally do, is 12 to 24 hours. And that's where you get your good loaves. That's where you get your loaves that people go, oh my God, did you make this bread? This is amazing. You'll get maximum amount of flavour. You will get the best digestibility that you can get out of white flour right across the board. And you'll get sourdough that just has those lovely air pockets in it, has a good crumb on the outside of it, and lasts for a very long time. If of course, it doesn't get eaten before that period in your house. Now, like I said, you don't need to babysit it the whole time. There are things you can do. And what I generally do is if the house is too warm, and in winter we have a wood fire going, so the house can heat up really quite significantly. Autumn and spring are my kind of trickier periods because the house is a little bit cool. Outside could be cold or it could be sunny, you don't know. So you kind of have to pay a bit more attention in those seasons. Summer, the house is cool. Outside is boiling hot. So I do have to manage it just a little bit, but winter is where I get really, really quick rises because the house is kept so warm. So the optimal temperature range for getting a sourdough ferment that produces a really good rise is, for Celsius people in Australia, 24 to 28 degrees Celsius. For my American friends, it is 75 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit that you want to be looking at. So you're reasonably warm. I mean, my English friends, I know when I went over to England, I walked around in the park over there with a singlet top on and it was, 22 degrees. And I had complete strangers walking up to me going, aren't you cold? I was like, no, 22 is good. Like, I'm okay with 22. I would say 24 to 28 is a reasonable temperature. It's quite warm. Some people would say that's cold. Some people would say it's too hot. I think I'm surprised actually that my English friends weren't going, oh my God, it's 22 degrees, get the suntan lotion out and lay out the paddock. But that temperature allows for the yeast, the wild yeast that you've got in there, to do all of its things. Anything below that is probably a bit cold and it's going to be slower, and you definitely will get into your 24-hour ferments with a cooler temperature. And then it comes down to that balancing act of managing it for when the dough is springy, but not overly like puffed up and inflated where it gets too hot, or not rising enough so that you can actually put it in the oven. And the one that OJ and I made last week, or earlier in the week, I should say, his one, it was a bit cool and I don't think it got the right rise out of it. And so it ended up like a little bit dense and he was disappointed. But I said to him, temperature wise, if it had been closer to the fireplace that we had over in the dining room, so it was out of the way, and that meant that it was just not getting the same heat out of it. Now, what I do is I whack it in the fridge once it's done that first bulk ferment. So once I've shaped it, that's when it goes into the fridge. And then you can leave it at that cooler temperature and it gets a real slow rise to it, which is fantastic. But you do need some heat to start with. So I did say 24 to 28 Celsius. So that's the sweet spot where you'll get sourdough yeast and bacteria really kind of thriving quite well, and you'll get a good balance between rise and flavour. If it goes over 28 degrees, so over 82 Fahrenheit, the dough can ferment too quickly and you end up with overproofing, weak structure, gummy crumb. What happens is it overproofs and then you end up with, like, I joke and refer to it as flatbread. It doesn't rise properly in the oven. And so you end up with like a gummy texture, like it feels like doughy. It doesn't rise up, so you don't get the height to it. And when you try and cut it, it just kind of squishes. It doesn't cut like bread. So that will be an overproof. That's too warm for that fermentation process. And an underproof, so under 24 degrees Celsius or 75 Fahrenheit, it slows the process down significantly, and that potentially means you need longer fermentation times. Now, that's when you whack it in the fridge, it's actually keeping it at that lower temperature for like 12 hours, which is fine if that's what you want to do, like me, if you're off grid and you have to put the oven on during the day when the sun's out, not at night time. That's the way to do it. But you still need to get that first initial rise in. So you still need that temperature in that first initial rise before you shape it and let it sit again. I hope that makes sense. So cold fermentation, we did talk about that. I've got it on my list to remind myself to say to you. That's putting it in the fridge overnight after you've shaped it. So after it's done bulk fermentation, you then pull it out, you shape it to put it into your basket or into your bread tray, whatever you're using. And then you put it in the fridge covered, and that allows it to do a very slow second rise. And that slow second rise makes the taste really good, makes the crumb really good. But having it in the fridge, one thing I will point out is that I find really easy is that it makes it really easy to score. So, and because I joke about how I forget to score the bread all the time, but when you score the bread, it lets some of the steam out, which is what gives it that lovely rise and puts the air bubbles in it. And if I forget to do it, or if I've had it out of the fridge too long and I go to do it, it can be quite gummy across the top if you don't have a really sharp razor blade. So having it in the fridge and scoring it straight out of the fridge makes it easier with just a normal knife to cut the score marks into it to allow that steam out. Now, salt. Salt is important as far as fermentation goes too. And there's a couple of reasons why. It strengthens the gluten is one. It makes the dough a bit easier to handle and not so floppy and spongy. It also controls some of the fermentation because it slows the yeast down just enough to give the bacteria time to actually do its job, its magic. And it also helps retain some moisture, which is what makes bread stay fresher for a bit longer. So I think you can leave salt out of sourdough. I've never left it out. I have no problem eating salt. I think salt got a very bad rap back in the 70s and 80s where we were told too much salt was going to kill us and all the rest of it. What they neglected to say was that the too much salt was on the too much processed or ultra-processed foods we're eating. And therefore, when you have a combination of ultra-processed foods in your diet and too much of everything else, yeah, maybe it's not good for you. But I have been on a fairly higher salt diet for the last 12 months and my health's never been better. And that was in line with my becoming more keto, more carnivore kind of lifestyle. With my bread, I have no problem putting salt on it. I think that it adds a certain quality to the sourdough, and I think without it, you would probably not get the same structure out of your sourdough. Scientifically wise, I'd say that most bakers would say you have to have salt in there. If you want to experiment, try it without it and see how you go. But I wouldn't. I probably wouldn't. I like it with salt in there. Now, I did speak about it the other week during the auto-lease period, which is that resting period after the flour and the water have been combined. You can add your salt before or after. I've tried it both ways, and to be honest, it's easier for me just to add it all at the beginning. When I did try it after, I actually didn't think the bread came out that well. So maybe I was doing something wrong. But some bakers swear by leaving the salt out until after the auto-lease period. They reckon that it interferes with gluten formation. I don't know. Yeah, so many people go, no, just whack it in the beginning. I think, again, that's one of those things that if you want to experiment when you're getting into sourdough, if you want to experiment and try it both ways and see which one's going to work better for you. And the main thing is get into a rhythm. Whatever works for you, keep doing that. If it doesn't work, tweak a little bit and see how you go. Now, I did find some interesting facts. I wanted to cover off some interesting facts about fermenting bread, because there are some things that I think I hear people say and I go, Really? Is that right? I don't know. Anyway, so most of these I found on reasonably good sources, but don't hold me to it as far as, oh my God, Cass, that's not correct. So the sour in sourdough comes from the lactic acid. I think we all know that. It produces the lactic acid, which is the same acid that gives milk its sour flavour when it's fermented in yogurt and sour cream and things like that. It has sourdough starters contain a variety of lactic acid bacteria with different cultures developing depending on the baking method, the location, and the materials used. So depending on your flour, depending on your location, you'll get different cultures within the bacteria. And that's why you'll see people, sometimes there's sourdough pages where people will swap sourdough starters from different parts of the country or the world to try and make a more complex starter. Sounds like a lot of work. I don't know that I could be bothered. And certainly in Australia, there's lots of foods that we can't import into Australia without it going through customs, and they would probably stop it and say, no, you can't have it. We try to keep things, blocked out, and of course it didn't work with our good old varroa mite with our bees. But anyway, digestion benefits we've already spoken about. Fermentation breaks down gluten and makes the bread easier to digest for people with gluten issues. Enhanced nutritional value. Now, I follow a guy over in the States who it's called Modern Stone Age Kitchen. And I want to say it's north or northeast of Washington City, not state. And Cheapskate Bay, I want to say Cheapskate Bay. He has a restaurant there and he eats like a human. That's what he calls it, eating like a human. And he is a archaeologist who became a chef, or the other way around, I can't remember. And he talks about different types of food and how we're supposed to eat it and how it's supposed to be for us and what's nutritionally better. He discusses the nutritional value of sourdough bread. He's a very big proponent for sourdough bread and sourdough everything. He actually ferments, and I can't wait. Next time I'm going to the US, I've said to the handy helper, we're going to Joel Salatin's farm, which is just outside of Washington, and we are going to this guy's restaurant because I have to eat some of this food. He ferments potatoes for French fries, which does my head in, but fermentation can make such a difference to food, and it really is the way that our bodies were designed to eat a lot of these foods. So I can't wait to try these fermented French fries. I think they'd be awesome. But he also does bread, he does pizza, he does all the shebang. And so for the fermentation process for flour can actually liberate minerals within it and add vitamin B to the flour. So you end up with an enhanced mineral and nutritional value out of your sourdough bread. Anyway, off my high horse on that. Flavour complexity. Obviously, sourdough is why we like it because it tastes good. We wouldn't eat it if it tasted like shit. But the long fermentation times is what produces that deeper, complex flavours. Excuse me. And somewhere I found this little detail, 300 volatile organic compounds identified in sourdough bread. That's insane, I know. Carbon dioxide for the rise. Obviously, carbon dioxide is what makes the air bubbles and makes the dough rise. Now, here's a good one. And this, I think the handy helper could back this up. For those that don't know, the handy helper actually works in corrections. So he looks after prisoners who are in custody. Alcohol in bread. For those that don't know or didn't have a misspent youth like me, poor old handy helper, he was surprised when I said, yes, I know how to do that. You can make alcohol from bread. And alcohol has a thing called ethanol in it, which is produced during the fermentation process. And that contributes to the rise and the unique flavour of the bread. Now, obviously, it's baked. When you bake it, there is no alcohol content in the bread as such. However, if you soak bread in water, it ferments again and produces ethanol. And so you can actually make alcohol from bread. You can also make it from fruits because when they ferment, they also produce it. So misspent youth, let's just say we may have tried to make it as kids out on the farm. And I think a couple of us succeeded and it tasted terrible. It tasted like we were drinking methylated spirits, which I would not recommend. Methylated spirits will make you blind if you drink it. So do not drink it. It's got too high an alcohol content. And that's the problem with making alcohol out of, like using the ethanol out of bread to make alcohol, is you can't measure the alcohol content. And realistically, I mean, most of the alcohol that we consume on a day-to-day basis at the pub or club or wherever you at home is going to be anywhere between about 3% and about 6 or 7%. Occasionally, you'll have things like we have a beautiful microbrewery here that makes ginger beer that is alcoholic, and it was 11%. Silly me, had a glass of it and couldn't understand why I could barely stand up afterwards. But we're not used to having the alcohol content of the drinks that we have these days is relatively low in comparison to other things. Now, that being said, some people obviously, I drink whiskey occasionally, which has a higher, I think it's about 30%, and overproof, things like rum that is overproof is over 50%, but it's still a measured alcohol content. Don't fuck around with it, kids. Don't try this at home. You will end up making alcohol that you can't measure the content of, and you could end up making yourself very, very sick and getting alcohol poisoning. So I don't recommend it. And according to the Handy Helper, when it is made in less than hygienic conditions, it stinks to high heaven. The smell is so overpowering. He doesn't know how anybody would get it up to their face and drink it. It's not a pleasant smell. You're not sipping a lovely glass of red. Now, ancient history. Sourdough, it was a form of fermented bread, obviously, and it dates back to 1500 BC, before Christ. It's a long time ago. Health benefits, we've discussed the fact that it's easier to digest for people with gut issues. Now, some people say that fermented foods are also more sustainable as they require less energy to make and store them. And I think also they just require less chemicals to make. So, for those that have been listening for a while, you probably know that while I don't consider myself a climate change denier, I certainly question some of the ethics around climate change, the industry that it is. And that's how I look at it. It is an industry. They're taking money off you to tell you that they're going to do something, but they actually can't provide any evidence of doing it. But I do really struggle with the fact that humans pollute so much of their environment by adding chemicals, artificial chemicals, to things that don't need to have artificial chemicals added to them. So fermented foods obviously are much more sustainable from that perspective. So to me, that's a win-win. Now, one thing that I didn't mention when I talked about starters, when I did my sourdough starter episode, is that sourdough starters can actually be preserved. You can dehydrate them and store them as dehydrated. And when you see, sometimes you'll see advertised online sourdough starter available in packets. It's dehydrated sourdough starter, and they send it out to you and you rehydrate it, and it kicks back into action. So that's amazing that, you think about it, you could, in the event of a climate crisis, like we talk about, where powers keep shutting down and things like that. I mean, sourdough starter, you can keep going on the bench. You just got to keep feeding it. But you could also dehydrate and have some in storage, like in a seed bank or something like that, so that if some kind of crisis did happen and your sourdough starter wasn't able to be kept and maintained, you could have dried sourdough starter that you could then start it back up again from, which is awesome. For all my prepper friends out there, I love you guys. You guys come up with some great ideas. Impact of gluten, we've discussed, that the bacteria breakdown is great and it makes it easier to digest. Flavor profile. Oh, now the other thing I was going to mention was FODMAPs. So for those that have had gut issues in the past, and like I have, FODMAPs is, and I can never remember, but it's a particular diet style that they get you to follow to try and reduce the inflammation in your gut and to try and fix any gut problems that you have, where you are not eating certain foods because those foods trigger responses in your stomach that you don't want. Now, fermented foods can help with FODMAPs. It can help with that diet process. And sourdough bread potentially could be a bread that you would be able to consume on FODMAPs that you currently, my understanding when I did FODMAPs was there was no bread that they really encouraged you to consume during that process, where sourdough might be something that you can. Just saying, if you like bread like me and you've got gut issues like me, well, it might be an option. Anyway, that's pretty much it for me for this week. Like we have discussed, sourdough does take time, and for some people that can be a real sticking point where it kind of puts them off. Please don't be put off by it. It's absolutely worth the effort that you put in. And like I say, once you get into a real pattern with it, you don't have to babysit the dough. So you're not sitting there watching it ferment and going, oh my God, what do I do next? You can leave it for 6 to 8 hours. I regularly leave it for 6 to 8 hours, walk away. 6 to 8 hours is enough to get your whole workday done. Go out and paddock, do what you have to do. You got horses you got to ride, you got goats you got to deal with, you got to get firewood in. I've got I've left it very late in the year to shear my Angoras. I've got to do my Angoras in the next week because we've just had a big cold snap and I really need to get their wool off them. Go out and do those things that you need to do and just set a timer on your phone, 8 hours time. Don't forget to check the bread, or put a post-it note on the door so when you come back in, you go, oh, I've got to go check the bread before I do anything else. It is worth it. And particularly if you've got those stomach issues like me, you don't have to knead it. It's an easy to make bread, like as in you don't physically have to do a lot to it. But if it's going to help you be able to have a more varied diet without having stomach problems, I would say definitely go for it. And also too, it tastes better. So of course I'm always going to be like that, And they say it doesn't go stale as quick, but I have to be honest, it never lasts in our house long enough to go stale. So yeah. I had a little note here that sounds really corny. We're working with the grain, not against the grain. Oh God, I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote that. I've been up since 4 o'clock in the morning doing some online training with a coach that's in the US, and I think the tiredness has kicked in and I probably need to go and have a little lie down. Not that I will be. Anyway, that's it for me for this week. Next week, I can't even remember what we're talking about, but we still have a couple more weeks, 2 more weeks, I think, to go on bread. And then we go on to cleaning products and how to make them at home. So stick with me. Anyway, bye for now. Well, that's it for today's episode of Ditch the Store. If you're loving the journey to self-sufficiency, be sure to subscribe. You can also leave a review for us or share this episode with a friend who's ready to break up with their supermarket. If you've got questions or success stories, we'd love to hear about them on the socials. You can also find me at www.mojohomestead.net. Until next time, keep raising, growing and making. And remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.